My name is Peter Rollins, and along with our President, Father Leahy, and our Chancellor, Father Monin, and our Executive Vice President, Pat Keating, I'd like to welcome you to the Chief Executives Club of Boston. We're always pleased to have the Fourth Estate here. In addition to the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald, we have the Wall Street Journal, Market Watch, Dow Jones, Associated Press, Reuters, Bloomberg Radio and TV. Also, Mary Ann Kane will once again be taping her CEO Corner show for New England Cable News, which will air Monday night at 7:30. Is that correct, Mary Ann? That's good. At our next luncheon, we will be providing each of you with a complimentary copy of former Channel 4 anchor Suzanne Bates' new book, Speak Like a CEO. It's a great book, by the way. And I know now, having spoken to her, she will be willing to sign each copy. So she'll be here for a few hours after the meeting. In addition to the who's who that are here today, I would like to acknowledge from the public sector the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Convention Center. If you build it, they will come, Jim Rooney. Jim? The CEO of Mass Development. If you build it, we will help finance it. Bob Culver. Bob? The Director of the BRA. You'd better check with me before you build anything. Mark Maloney. Mark. The competent and impressive CEO of Massport, Craig Coy. The most articulate member of the Governor's Cabinet, and that includes the Governor, Ranch Kimball. Ranch? And simply the #1 mayor in the United States who continues to make Boston shine, Tom Menino. And speaking of #1, a man who has brought 3 Super Bowls in 4 years to New England, and who is making us all feel like winners, the iconic and dynamic owner of the Patriots, Bob Kraft. One of our previous keynote speakers, Pat Stokes, CEO of Anheuser-Busch, is so supportive of this program that he's decided to make it possible for a major scholarship to be given to a deserving BC student in the name of today's keynote speaker. Please join me in recognizing BC student Susanna Obertanova, winner of the Dominic D'Alessandro Scholarship. Susanna? Pat Stokes will also be making similar scholarships available in the name of selected future speakers. We're both humbled and grateful for this unique expression of generosity. If you haven't yet joined our club, and I urge you to do so, I ask that you pick up one of our brochures as you depart in the foyer, and remember to include 2 primary sponsors and 6 secondary sponsors, so that we may properly consider your application. The new people here are nervous. We will next gather on June 14th when partners Jim Mongden will host Eastman Kodak CEO Dan Karp. Other confirmed speakers include Verizon's CEO Ivan Seidenberg, Disney's incoming CEO Bob Iger, United Technologies CEO George David, former president of CBS and now CEO of EDS, Michael Jordan, and the CEO of America's largest biotech company, Amgen's Kevin Scherer. Now let me thank Leahy Clinic's David Barrett for hosting today's event and invite him to the podium to introduce our speaker. David?
Dominic D'Alessandro has been the President and Chief Executive Officer of Manulife Financial since January of 1994. Mr. D'Alessandro has led the company to its 11th consecutive year of record financial performance, resulting in Manulife being among the most profitable insurance companies in North America. Mr. D'Alessandro led a successful demutualization and conversion of the company to public status in September of 1999. This important accomplishment set the stage for the company to become a world leader in the financial services industry. In 2004, he managed the largest cross-border transaction in Canadian history, with the successful merger of John Hancock Financial, creating the second largest life insurance company in North America and the fifth largest in the world. Mr. D'Alessandro graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in Physics and Mathematics from Loyola College in Montreal, and also is qualified as a chartered accountant. As well as receiving many and outstanding awards, Mr. D'Alessandro was named an Officer of the Order of Canada in August of 2003. This happens to be the highest civilian honor that Canada bestows upon its citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, Dominic D'Alessandro.
Well, thank you very much for that very generous introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's such a pleasure to be here in Boston with all of my many friends. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to speak to such a distinguished group. I had the privilege earlier in my career of living for some years in the United States, and the experience convinced me that at least one cliche about Canadian-American relations is absolutely true. Canadians tend to be extremely well informed about America. Americans, on the other hand, while full of goodwill towards Canada, usually have a difficult time paying any attention to us at all. So I thought I might try to correct that a little bit today and talk about three subjects which I hope you'll find interesting. First, about Manulife Financial, which is the company I run, which, as you heard, happens to be one of the largest public companies in Canada. Second, the Canadian economy, which is so closely tied to your own and which has undergone quite a transformation in the last decade. And third, the changing relationship between our two countries and how we might do more to compete together in the rest of the world. So let's start with Manulife Financial, which is probably best known here in New England as the company that last year merged with John Hancock Financial Services. Manulife has come a long way in the last few years. As you've heard, we've grown from a mutual company with a book value of less than $3 billion 10 years ago to a public company which is now listed on stock exchanges in Toronto, New York, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. Our market capitalization is more than $47 billion, making us the second largest insurer in North America and the fifth largest in the world. We are a very international company with operations in 19 countries. We generate about 1/4 of our earnings in Canada, 1/2 here in the United States, and the balance throughout the rest of the world. One of the features of our company that distinguishes us from many North American insurers is our significant presence in Asia, where we have operations in 10 countries, including rapidly growing businesses in China, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Japan. Our company offers a full range of protection and wealth management services through a very broad array of distribution channels. Here in the United States, for example, where we have chosen to operate under the John Hancock brand, we are a leading provider of all forms of life and long-term care insurance. We also offer savings products such as mutual funds, pension plans, and variable and fixed annuities. Our products are sold not just by a captive sales force, but also through a vast network of banks, wirehouses, brokerage firms, and independent agents. I'm often asked to explain how it is that we've been able to perform so well and grow so quickly. I don't want to abuse my welcome here today, so I hope you'll be pleased to hear that I don't intend to launch into a dissertation on our particular management practices. However, I would say that the single biggest reason for our success has been our ability to execute, and the credit for that goes to a team of very talented and ambitious employees, a few of who are here with us in the room today, and to a highly decentralized structure that emphasizes accountability. One final confession about us, about Manulife, is that we're possibly more optimistic about the future than is properly Canadian. Despite our vigorous growth in recent years, we believe we have by no means peaked or plateaued. Demographic trends around the world are favoring us. The populations of developed countries are getting older and richer and more likely to buy financial products. And increasingly, governments are trying to manage the retirement and benefit entitlements of their populations by privatizing these services. And there's also going to be exploding demand for financial services in the developing nations of Asia. Actually, though I sometimes poke fun at the modesty of my home country, it would be a mistake to underestimate Canada's prospects or how far we've come. In the last 10 years, we Canadians have put a tremendous distance between ourselves and our reputation as the Sweden of North America, a country with a keen social conscience but an overburdened economy. In truth, by the early 1990s, Canada was facing serious economic difficulties. Government deficits were spiraling higher every year. Combined with large trade and current account deficits, Canada's foreign debt was climbing at an alarming rate, adding to inflationary pressures, pushing down the value of our currency, and pushing interest rates higher. Does it sound familiar to any of you? Some international observers suggested that Canada was about to hit the debt wall and that we might have to call in the International Monetary Fund for a bailout. And all this came about just as Canadian companies were facing the immense new competitive pressures flowing from the 1988 Free Trade Agreement with the United States. But we put our heads together and built a real national consensus on the kind of decisive actions that were needed to overcome our challenges. Governments attacked deficits with a vengeance and returned the economy to fiscal health. Our central bank waged a successful war against inflation, giving Canada a level of price stability among the very best in the industrialized world. Our enterprises and our workers took on the pressures of free trade and figured out how to win in the bigger North American market with competitive products and services. None of these actions were pain-free, but they did pay off with amazing speed. Since the beginning of this decade, Canada has led the G7 nations both in the rate of economic growth and in the pace of job creation. It continues to report a steady string of surpluses in its international trade and fiscal accounts, and it has produced the G7's biggest gain in recent years in the standard of living of its citizens. All this superb economic news has had a powerful impact on government finances. Our federal government has now reported a surplus for 7 years in a row. Federal debt has plummeted from 68% of gross domestic product in 1995 to less than 39% and is on track to fall to 25% within the next decade. And as a country, Canada's net foreign debt has been slashed from 45% of GDP to less than 14% today. The ironic thing is that when Canada signed the free trade agreement with the United States, as I said, in 1988, there was an outpouring of doom in every province. Many Canadians thought that our worst national nightmare was about to come true. We would finally be swallowed up by the great economic engine on our southern border and become a branch office of America, Inc. Today, however, all but the most hardcore of economic nationalists have been forced to admit that they were wrong. Free trade has paid off for both sides. Canada now exports 48% of all the manufactured goods it produces to this country. We also sell the United States many of the natural resources its industries need, including a lot of energy. We produce all of your imported electricity and almost all of your imported natural gas, and we sell you more oil than Saudi Arabia. How many of you knew that? In turn, Canada is the single largest foreign customer for the state of Massachusetts and 38 other American states. We buy almost 25% of the goods that the United States exports. This is more than Japan, Germany, Britain, Italy, and China combined. The Canadian province of Ontario alone buys more from the United States than the entire country of Japan. Add it all up, and the trade with Canada provides jobs for some 5.2 million Americans. While we have seen extensive new investment flowing into Canada from the United States since our free trade agreement, we are far from being swallowed up by corporate America. In fact, Canadian companies have been doing more than their share of the buying, including Manulife, whose John Hancock purchase was the largest Canadian acquisition of a foreign company in Canada's history. Clearly, these increasing connections between our two economies are making both countries more prosperous. We all understand that in the abstract. However, I'm well aware that the changes brought about by economic integration can also be unsettling to some. For example, I know it hasn't been easy for some people to see a local icon like John Hancock be acquired by a relative stranger and a foreigner to boot. And the press tends to lump Manulife in with those out-of-town buyers who some say are stripping Boston of its flagship businesses. But there are at least two large differences between us and those other buyers. First of all, our acquisition of John Hancock was not primarily a cost-cutting merger. It was a merger about growth. There was actually very little overlap in our products and distribution. Instead, our businesses here are complementary, and I am pleased to say we are already enjoying robust revenue synergies. The merger has not led to any appreciable reduction in employment levels in this community. In fact, our expectation is that our presence here will, if anything, grow noticeably over time. We see fantastic opportunities in America in the life insurance market, which is extremely fragmented here with over 1,100 life insurance companies. The top 5 players in America do not control even 25% of new life insurance sales. You contrast this with most other developed nations, including Canada, where the top 5 players control 2/3 or more of new sales. This is a market crying out for consolidation. A well-capitalized company like mine is in an excellent position to help things along, especially now using the very powerful John Hancock brand. Second, we have a completely different relationship with the city than some of those other acquirers that I mentioned. It is worth remembering that Manulife has actually been in Boston for 10 years now, and that we liked it here so much that notwithstanding the challenges, we undertook to build a new head office facility in South Boston. We came here well before any possible combination with John Hancock had been contemplated. Manulife has been in the United States for 102 years, and throughout most of that time, our U.S. business units were managed out of Canada. But by 1995, we felt we needed an American base. Although we were licensed in Michigan, we chose to come to Boston, in part because we were impressed by the leadership here. The mayor, who I'm glad to see is with us here today, the governor, the insurance commissioner, were all very welcoming and businesslike. They asked the right questions, and their staffs were very helpful to us. We also like the fact that Boston is such a cosmopolitan and livable city with plenty of everything. A well-developed financial services industry, great universities, great hospitals. As I said earlier, we've chosen to operate under the John Hancock brand, which is far better known in the United States than Manulife could ever hope to be. All of Manulife's existing products have already been rebranded, and our various legal entities here will ultimately be folded under the John Hancock corporate structure. We fully expect, as I said earlier, that John Hancock will remain the important icon it has always been in this region. And we intend to contribute to Boston's excellent quality of life through maintaining the commitment to community events such as the Boston Marathon. We know that Boston is good for us, and we expect to be very good for Boston as well. I would like to say, too, that in my opinion, David D'Alessandro and the board at Hancock are to be complimented for the very excellent job they did in selecting a merger partner. You would expect me to say that, but there's good reason for saying it. You know, they were preoccupied not just with securing a good financial deal for their shareholders, which it was, but also they wanted a deal that would be good for policyholders, employees, and the community at large. I think the time will show that they could not have made a better choice. Manulife's experience in the United States brings me to a larger point. The most important relationship that our two countries have in the world is with each other. So let's talk a bit about where we steer the relationship from here. Obviously, there are several places where our two countries are not seeing eye to eye these days, including trade questions surrounding softwood lumber and beef, and even the more vexing arena of foreign policy where Iraq and missile defense are issues. And unfortunately, I can't tell you that all of these irritants will soon be resolved. And maybe we should just be prepared to accept that there are going to be places where our two governments are going to disagree. However, there are plenty of things for our governments to work on where agreement ought to be easy, and working on them is likely to pay off handsomely for both countries. I belong to an organization called the Canadian Council of Chief Executives, which recently proposed a new bilateral initiative for bringing our countries into closer economic partnership. Here are a few suggestions. One, create a truly seamless market for trade in goods, beginning with the harmonization of the tariffs we charge third countries. Two, allow any American or Canadian to work freely in either country. Why not? Three, harmonize the regulations and standards that make it inefficient for businesses to operate in both countries. For example, does anyone really care whether cheese-flavored popcorn contains a maximum of 49% cheese as in the US or 53% as in Canada? And finally, and most importantly, while we are opening our border to trade, we need to make sure that we work together to maintain the security of our external borders against the threat of terrorism. In fact, the Canadian CEO's Council recently sponsored a Trilateral Commission to develop a joint strategy for security perimeter around North America, while at the same time easing travel between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. There is no excuse for delaying. The American head of the commission, your former Governor Bill Weld, put it this way: it took 5 years to fight World War II. Surely we can harmonize a few government departments in that time. Fortunately, our leaders now seem to have a sense of urgency about these issues of trade and security. In March, President Bush, Prime Minister Martin, and Mexican President Fox created working groups to explore new avenues of cooperation between our two countries, and they demanded that these working groups deliver their initial report by June of this year. To this list of suggestions from the Canadian CEO group, I'd like to add one more. We ought to make an effort to learn from each country's best practices. For example, while for Manulife the experience of doing business here in the United States has been delightful and instructive, probably won't surprise you to know that there are a few areas that are challenging. For example, I can't say that I'm a great fan of the recent legislation aimed at improving corporate governance in this country. Sarbanes-Oxley's extensive reporting requirements are extremely costly, yet relatively meaningless as a deterrent to the kind of abuse that has so offended the American public. Paperwork has rarely discouraged anyone truly intent on fraud. Much more effective, in my opinion, is the government's vigorous prosecution of those engaging in it. In Canada, we produce far fewer accounting scandals. In part, this is because our accounting system is principles-based, and therefore not as subject to abuse as the rules-based system which is in effect in this country. Perhaps the U.S. has something to learn from us here. I'm sure it will not startle you that America's litigiousness is also perceived by some as something of a problem. We all know that it is an incredible drag on the U.S. economy. However, it's one thing as a foreigner to read that America has 1 million people employed in the legal profession, and it's quite another to experience firsthand the trouble 1 million enterprising people can cause. I'm absolutely stunned at the extent to which the legal system dominates here and the fact that lawyers have to be involved to the extent that they are in every manner of transaction. If you're a big company, you often wind up paying out substantial amounts of money, not to benefit your shareholders, not to benefit the injured party or third party, but simply to buy the peace. In Canada, we discourage legal opportunists by insisting that the loser in a civil case has to pay the winner's legal costs. In addition, virtually every civil case is decided by a judge who is presumably a bit more sober than the average jury. Of course, I'm not here to tell you how to run your country, but I do think that a more rational tort system is a sensible goal, and President Bush's proposals for reform are, in my opinion, a good start. Obviously, we Canadians have much to learn from America as well. We need to learn how to create more world-class companies. We need to invest more in research and development and become more innovative. Producing more engineering graduates wouldn't hurt us either. And perhaps it would even be good for us to develop more national pride, something Americans have in abundance. The truth is, harmonizing our regulations, managing our borders more intelligently, making an effort to learn from each other are not just pleasant things for friends to do. They are now an imperative brought on by the changes in the world economy. When the Free Trade Agreement between Canada and the United States was first signed in 1988, it gave our countries a leadership position in world trade and helped to propel both countries forward. Since then, Europe has made great strides, and economies like China's that once stagnated under central government control are now growing by leaps and bounds. Competitive advantages which once came easily to us are disappearing as other economies become as sophisticated as our own. Even America no longer looks like such a big market when compared to a European Union of 450 million people, an India of 1.1 billion, or a China of 1.3 billion. In other words, we have to work to retain our advantages. I suggest we do it together. And I suggest this not merely because we could use the scale or because we're so close geographically, but also because we share so many values. While much is sometimes made of the differences between American conservatism, though not in New England, and Canadian liberalism, these differences are superficial compared to our mutual belief in democracy, the rule of law, the protection of fundamental human rights, free speech, free press, and free enterprise. This may sound like a string of platitudes, but Manulife does enough business around the globe for me to assure you that it is not. We actually operate in some countries where some of these values are not held or hang on by only the weakest of threads. That experience helps us to appreciate the benefits of living side by side with the United States. The truth is, our two countries are natural allies and partners, and we should insist that our governments push aside any roadblocks between us. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, let me say that even if you don't consider Canada a fascinating subject, and you may be justified in the opinion, I suspect you already know this much about Canadians. There is no country or people on earth for whom we Canadians have more respect or affection than for the Americans. So thank you very much for your attention today. It's been such a great pleasure for me to be here, and I hope to be coming more often in the future. Thank you.
Mr. D'Alessandro will take some questions. If you have a question, please use the microphone.
Hi, Joe Hansen from Lexington Strategic. How does your corporate giving policy compare with John Hancock's?
I don't know, I'm not sure exactly what you mean. How does it compare? We have as a philosophy, I think that they married up reasonably well. We both like to be engaged in the communities where we do business and to support the communities where we are represented. We do that around the world in an appropriate manner. So, I mean, there isn't, I didn't detect that there was, you know, a bridge there to be got over. I don't know if I'm answering your question. Have you got did you make an application for a contribution? And
I'm Margie Ahrens-Barron. Your new building has been acclaimed for its embrace of green building technology. Could you talk a little bit about how the decision is made to spend more money up front, when you expect the payback to occur, and what that decision suggests about your basic corporate philosophy?
yeah, well, I wish I could tell you a better story than you're going to hear. It cost us a lot more than we expected it to. So we didn't start off with the idea that we should spend as much as it ultimately turned out to cost. I'm told it's a bit of an adventure building a new building here in Boston, Mr. Mayor. But it was designed to be leading edge in terms of environmental and conservation. And I mean, you know, we have a large real estate department within the company. We're very, very large owners of real estate here in the United States, as it turns out, not through John Hancock, but through Manulife's own activities. And we're very proud of it, just as we are of everything we do. If we're going to own something or do something, we try to do it very, very well. And we've got some signature properties in Washington. We're probably one of the largest owners of commercial real estate in the city of Washington. And some of those buildings are just beautiful. And in keeping with that tradition, we wanted to build something that was nice.
Hi, Rod Forder. Question I had was relating to the Kyoto agreements that went into effect on February 16th. Do you see any competitive disadvantages arising
Oh, you know,
from
if
that?
you talk to people in the energy sector in Canada, they're about to commit suicide. Now they're so happy that maybe the government will fall and Kyoto will go by the wayside. I don't really know enough about the issue. So, you know, I can't give you a knowledgeable answer. As a citizen, I guess that, you know, I'd like a greener rather than a dirtier world. I worry that, you know, the scientists, I know there's a big debate as to whether or not global warming is real or not. The science is supposed to be junk science, but, you know, sometimes I wonder, it's not something you want to be even a little wrong about, do you? Because, you know, should they turn out that they weren't wrong, the consequences are disastrous for the whole world. Whether the Kyoto Accords, as they're presently configured, are the right answer to the problem, I don't know. I mean, you know, Canada has stuck out its neck and has signed the agreements. The United States has not, and there's some major, you know, India and China certainly are not members of Kyoto. Will we see the day where, you know, the Canadians are paying and buying these emission credits from other countries? I think it would be very hard for a government to say we're sending a ton of money to Russia or wherever to buy hot air. You know, so I don't know. It's a noble idea, which in the practicality may have some challenges. But you know, I don't know any more about. I run an insurance company. Yeah, one more question? Yeah.
An impediment to business growth in the U.S. you didn't mention is rising healthcare costs, another area where Canada and the U.S. have had quite different approaches. Would be interested in your perspective on that issue.
Well, I mean, I think you know the statistics as well as I do. America spends more money as a percentage of its GDP on healthcare, and yet it's the only industrialized nation. Again, don't take this as a shot. We're having a frank exchange that has 50 million of its citizens that apparently are not covered. So, you know, this does look a little awkward. On the other hand, in Canada, we have universal health care. It's portable, et cetera, and we're not happy with it. We're finding that people with the means manage to, I was speaking to Dr. Barrett, manage to drift down here to look after, we're trying to fine-tune our system. There's the ideologues are against any two-tiering, having a parallel and private system alongside that. But I believe that will come. It'll have to come because we can't afford the system as it's designed and keep it at a very excellent state. I mean, we either want to have what's now been designed and watch it gradually decay, or we're going to overhaul it to allow for private provision of some services. I mean, when the system was designed, it was in the mid-'60s, the country's demographics, the difference, between old and young people and the number of births, all those things have changed. And yet this sacrosanct, the governments have been the Canadians are very attached to their healthcare system. But I think they will need to be convinced by people like me and others that it's not sustainable and maybe we'll drift to a private care system. I'm not a big fan of the system in the U.S. personally. I think that as a very large and powerful country, all citizens, there's some basic rights. I think part of the excessive costs in the system, or maybe the thing I talked about before, was the legal costs. I mean, it's insane. I have some friends that are doctors down here. Their biggest expense is insurance, malpractice insurance. So maybe there's things that both countries need to do. There's some improvements can be made here, and certainly we can learn from some of the experiences of the United States and how we might make our system more efficient. Well, thank you very much.
Small token of Boston College CEO Club's appreciation. Thank you very much. We hope you come back.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
We're adjourned.